Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about that hesitation that you miss your chance. Blue-eyed girl moves away. You never did ask her to dance. You don't know what she would say. So we'll be talking about the hesitation, the resistance, sometimes even the prohibition, reluctance to dance the dance. That's the topic tonight. Wallflowers. I don't know if you were a wallflower or not. Yeah.
At a point in my life, yes, and at a point I was out in the middle of it. So
Yeah, all right. One way or another. All right. We're not even going to ask Carol. We don't want to go there. So that's what we're thinking about. How about you, Linda and Mel? Are you wallflowers or?
In high school, I certainly was. Yeah, that was the way. The guys would be on one side and the girls would be on someplace else.
Yeah.
I agree with Mike. There was a time I was, and there was a time I wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we get to wallflowers, though, we want to pick up with a question that Diane asked at the end of last week. And she pointed out it might be helpful. It's kind of confusing when I'm talking about these dance and balance and things we're pulling out of the examples of dance, balance and movement. Is this metaphor or is it literal? And I was glad I was out of time. I was saved by the bell. I didn't have to answer it because I wasn't sure how to answer it. Thought I was off the hook and just everybody forget about it. But Jane pointed out to me that she also thought it would be good to think about whether it's a metaphor or literal. We're thinking about dance. Well, I didn't want to answer it. It's not easy to answer. I think it could be either one or both. As I was wrestling with that, it was kind of, I don't know, trying to come to something that would make sense. I still didn't want to commit if it was metaphor or if it was literal. And I thought about just having you, and maybe we will, when we're talking about it at a different time, we'll have to say, we'll take a vote. Is this literal or is this a metaphor? So I was trying to figure that all out and started just set it aside, started working on a sermon coming up for Sunday. And it happens to be the Samaritan woman at the well. And I read this story. It's a short story, very short story. The Lord was drinking some water out of a glass. There was nothing wrong with the glass, but the water tasted terrible. This was in a white building on a vast wasteland. The engineers within wore white uniforms and booties on their shoes and gloves on their hands. The water had traveled many hundreds of miles through wide pipes to be there. What have you done to my water? The Lord asked. My living water. Oh, they said, we thought that was just a metaphor. And not to spoil the story by overanalyzing it, this is the article I was reading, but notice the twist in the marvelous last sentence. Oh, we thought it was just a metaphor. What a breathtaking disclosure of the way metaphor works. A metaphor is a small word picture that can carry vast meaning within it. When Jesus tells a woman he can give her living water, he's clearly speaking metaphorically. But she misses the point. She thinks he's talking about literal water from the well. The engineers in their sterile uniforms in their dystopian laboratory miss the point too, only they have it backward. They don't think Jesus' water applies to real drinking water. It's just a metaphor. So I think it can be both at the same time. Well, how can you tell if it's metaphor or literal? I think it depends on which one we need to hear. Which one's the easiest for us to understand? Then it's the other one. I think for us to truly get it, whichever one's the easiest to understand, it probably should be the other one at that minute. But it needs to be both and instead of one or the other. Does that clear it up, Jane?
Sure, I'll go with that.
Sure.
Yes.
I
Like
think
what?
when you look at stuff like just that last song, when we look at the theme song we listened to, I Hope You Dance, and life being a dance, I think that's obviously a metaphor. And then you look at that metaphor, but you look at dance more, and you understand more aspects of the metaphor. You see a literal dance that is about balance, about leading and following. It's about movement. And that's the literal thing. But you can apply it to your spiritual life. Well, it's much more than a metaphor. It's one that actually can transform your spiritual walk in your life. It can give you new life. And I believe it takes more than a metaphor to give you new life, right? I don't know. So it's both and. That's all I got to say about that. But maybe we'll take a vote as we go. If it's metaphor or not. It's both and. All right. That's cleared up. We'll keep thinking about that. Wallflowers. In the Lord of the Dance, in the second stanza, the words are, I danced, this is Jesus, the Lord of the dance. I danced for the scribe and Pharisee, but they would not dance. They would not follow me. So it's always been an issue. And yes, the metaphor there is discipleship, the walk of Christ. He showed them the kingdom of God, and they wouldn't follow. Right? So tonight we maybe going to be called to kind of dance above the surface of the world and let your thoughts lift you into creativity is not hampered by opinion. I like that quote for this lesson because, well, it's kind of saying not going to be hampered by the opinions of others, but it might even talk about metaphor a little bit, that we're going to rise above the surface of the literal. And so we're going to rise above the surface of the world or the surface of the literal, and we're going to lift our thoughts to metaphors and not be hampered by either what's literal or what's somebody's opinion, and dance on a higher plane. Okay. So it's an article about somebody here that's a couple of articles that were talking about liturgical dance or dance and worship. And anybody ever seen liturgical dance? Been where that was? It can be a real engaging and moving experience, but it's slow to catch on in certain kinds of churches, ours being among them. We're a little, not sure about that. We might like to see it, but we sure wouldn't want to do it. Yeah. But are you fully engaged by watching a dance, or do you have to dance?
Watch. You can be fully engaged watching.
I guess for those of us who've never really danced, obviously we feel like we're engaged. I don't know if it'd feel any more different or more engaged if I actually was doing the dance or not. Might.
I think that it would two different levels of engagement. You can get very involved just watching.
Mm-hmm.
If you follow the story and understand what they're what the message is and get very involved.
Well, these are some accounts, a couple of different articles of folks that were engaging more fully, were evolving in their dance engagement. Okay. So this guy is saying, by doing something with my body other than just standing there, I've discovered that my experience of worship is significantly widened and deepened. Mainline Protestants have long lamented the wordiness of our worship. Long sermons, readings and prayers, a particular post-enlightenment form of praise that tends to be expressed largely in motionless listening and thinking. In traditional Protestant worship, there is little to see with the eye and little movement of the body, nothing but the occasional standing and sitting. Now, Marita's favorite passage in the Bible, David dancing naked. David dancing with all of his money before the Ark of the Covenant.
You're gonna pay one.
Yeah, it's gonna catch up on you.
She brought it up last week.
He's gonna throw everybody under the bus tonight.
Maybe we shouldn't be here.
So David's dancing with all of his might before the Ark of the Covenant, uninhibited, unclad, unaware of disapproval. And then he was also expressing a generosity with which he blessed people and distributed food to all the people. Both are extravagant gestures that turn love into action, withholding nothing. Okay, so that same person goes on to say, I believed what I was taught as a young person about the wisdom of taking no thought of the morrow. But I took rather a lot of thought about other things. Prudence, propriety, and reserve ranked high among virtues I counted as marks of godliness, mandated by Scripture and ratified by Jesus himself. I would never have been caught in a wild liturgical dance. My generosities were laced with a certain nervous anxiety about my budget. Extravagance was not generally encouraged in the circles I inhabited, though generosity was. Sometimes it was hard to distinguish between the two, so I erred on the side of withholding something. Does that kind of explain inhibition? I don't want to go for broke. There's a little something on us, and if we think that it could go either way, we're going to err on the side of being reserved, not putting ourselves out there. It's kind of a picture for me. Happen to be talking about dance, but I think we talk about it in a lot of situations. Not wanting to ask that blue-eyed girl out, and what was it? Whatever grade it was. 14. You know, she might say yes, but she might say no.
And if she said yes, what would I do?
Yeah, so you err on the side of caution and just don't ask, because then you haven't been told no. And you haven't been told yes, and you have to know what to do next. So that's kind of the picture of the feeling. I don't think it's too hard to imagine what resistance or inhibition feels like. I think we've learned that in our circles, probably since childhood. If our parents didn't beat it out of us, our teachers did. If they both failed somewhere along the way, we ran into somebody who set us down a notch or two, and we outgrew some of that youthful cockiness and self-confidence, because somewhere along the way we've met with failure. And that has a way of just quietening you down a little bit. So that's inhibition. So we're gonna talk about some prohibitions, basis of where all of these feelings and attitudes of restriction come from. There's negatives associated with dance that seem to cast a shadow over the essence and essential role, the sacred movement, even in the act of worship. So we're talking about literal dance here, I think. Dance is a powerful tool and can generate a substantial backlash. You don't believe that? Think about just the repercussions of Super Bowl halftime shows, or it doesn't take. It's powerful and it creates a lot of opinions. Is that safe to say? All right. Now we see music and singing emphasized more often in Scripture. And when we see dance, oftentimes it's associated with causing envy, ridicule, conflict, and even the death of a prophet cost John the Baptist his head, a dance. Not that he did, but it was the prize of the dance. So a lot of basis of negativity associated with it, with dance and moving. Dance can serve as a weapon anytime hidden motives are present. Now, that was written by somebody who teaches liturgical dance, teaching the dancers kind of the all that's involved in it, and that when they're dancing liturgically, to understand that it has a lot of baggage with it and a lot of power to influence and get different kinds of reactions. So they have to be guarded in that, to not let those unintentional things and hidden motives become present over and drown out the message that they're trying to present in worship. Does that make sense? We're going to look at a couple of biblical places, biblical illustrations of how those who know and hold to the Bible literally will see evidence that dancing is where they went wrong. Okay. The people of Israel in Exodus 32 and throughout, it seemed like people of Israel were they liked to get a move on. They liked to dance. It was frequent in their celebrating victories of war. It was a significant part of feasts and feasting celebrations. It was a part of worship throughout the Psalms. In worship, they were told to have the music and singing and the dancing. And the singing always led the way. It was interesting to see that as I was looking at this. The singers were up front, and then the music and dancing would follow behind it, so as to make sure the message was communicated. You know what the story was that was going with it. There might be some exceptions to that, but there's also with Israel dancing, they had some problems associated with it. And Exodus 32 is an example of how they were dancing before the golden calf, worshiping idols. So you start tapping your foot, and you're next thing you know, you're going to be worshiping a golden calf. That's the way it works. It's that slippery slope of sin. Right? Then David, of course. David, I'm going to read that just so everybody's clear.
Oh, good.
Coming back,
So
coming back.
here, The Lord's chest was brought in and put in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. Then David offered entirely burnt offerings to the Lord's presence in addition to well-being sacrifices. When David finished offering the entirely burnt offerings and well-being sacrificed, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of heavenly forces. He distributed food among all the people of Israel to the whole crowd, male and female, each receiving a loaf of bread and a date cake and a raisin cake, and all the people went back to their homes. Then went David to bless his household, but Saul's daughter Michal came to meet him. How did the king honor himself today? She said, by exposing himself in plain view of the female servants and the subjects like any indecent person would. David replied to Michal, I have celebrated before the Lord, who chose me over your father and your entire family, to appoint me leader over the Lord's people of Israel. And I will celebrate before the Lord again. I may humiliate myself even more, and I may be humbled in my own eyes, but I will be honored by the female servants who you're talking about. So this was following his dance. He danced with all of his strength before the Lord. This is how David's entire house went up to the temple. So that worship that got out of hand, but you see the marital discord there, and they were really coming at each other with some barbs. And, his wife Michal was saying, you know, you've really honored yourself today. He's like, well, speaking of honored, I've been honored more than your father's household. I'm the king, not your daddy. And so they were going at it. And said, I'll do it again. Might not be honored to you, but the girls all like it. So that was where they were going with this. So, and there's debate in parallel passages of just how unclad he was or whatever it was, but it might not have taken a whole lot for the wife to exaggerate. Who knows? But perhaps he was out of costume a little. So there he was, and first thing you know, you pat your foot.
It's your birds,
and off it goes.
This is the chair.
For all the world to see. That's that
right here.
way that it goes. So there's that association with wrong there. Then Vashti, in the book of Esther, refused to dance for the drunken crowd.
Yes, you got it.
So that was kind of understood of she put up her guard and stood her ground, and she stood her ground until she didn't, until she couldn't. Her life was taken because she refused to dance. Then Salome dance was rewarded for the drunken party. Was rewarded with the head of John the Baptist. Right here. And so there's this biblical prohibitions of things that are associated with it. Guilt by association. You're going to have a dance, you're going to have naked people and idols. That's just the way it is. And some along the way have been proved that to be true. So, there you go. Evidence, exhibit A and B and C, you can find it. Well, then there's philosophies that come along, not limited to, but probably maybe not even starting with the Gnostics, believing that the body and the flesh were evil, and the spiritual life being completely separated. Never should the two meet. Anything that had to do with attention being focused on the body or the flesh, the Gnostics said that was unspiritual. So that's to be avoided, because we have to rise to a higher level than that. So all kinds of those philosophies, some before, but many after. Think about the Puritan philosophies, covering the body to the ankles and staying away from the sinful desires that the flesh entails. Okay, so all kinds of philosophies went with it. Then probably the most potent and powerful. I mean, the Bible could say whatever it wants to say, whatever. You believe it, you don't believe it, right, Mike?
I'm not answering.
Yeah. In the philosophies, well, that's over there. That's fine for them. The colonialism, they could put a little oomph behind their regulations and their prohibitions. They could make it illegal, and yeah, instead of for not dancing like Vashti, they could make you pay if you did when it came to that. So Islam and Christianity destroyed worship rituals of goddesses facing in the Middle East in the 15th century. So just the Egyptian dance, like we saw last week, it was associated with goddesses of, Islam and Christianity both kind of wiped those out. They tried to eliminate dances relegated and related to sexuality or fertility. That moment, the Oriental dance began to be valued for the sensitivity that dancers provoked. Like, oh, we've got something here that's getting somebody's attention. Okay. Well, colonialism there, and this little book was written by a Methodist. He happens to be Native American, and he shares numerous accounts of Native American prohibitions. Among our native people, dancing was a rich part of our culture. There were social dances, times of community celebration. There were also sacred dances. There was dancing, there was prayer. In the late 1800s, it became illegal to teach our children our native languages. The motto of one of the first boarding schools was kill the Indian and save the child. It became illegal to practice our ceremonies. Sacred things were destroyed or seized. Missionaries told us that our dancing was sin. When dancing is a form of prayer, and prayer becomes considered sin, then the spiritual core of a people began to fragment. They began to grasp for the sacred. At times you turn inward in despair, convinced that there is nothing good about the person God created. And along with that, another example of prohibitions and colonialism. In Scotland, okay, in Scotland, when the English outlawed the playing of the great bagpipes, Highland dancing, and the wearing of the tartan, people would go to church clutching small remnants of plaid between their thumbs and forefingers. When the Irish clerics ruled that it was inciting immorality to move any part of your body and dance except your ankles and feet, the Irish began beautiful step dancing, keeping the body rigid but moving the feet in intricate patterns at varied speed. Well, that's not what history tells you. That's not what history tells you. It's not. According to history, the history of the Irish step dance was because local venues were usually small, dances were often demonstrated on tabletops or even tops of barrels. As a result, these early styles are characterized by the arms held rigidly at the sides and a lack of lateral movement. As larger dance venues became available, styles grew to include more movement of the body and around the dance area. That's the history. Maybe a little bit protected. I don't know. I might tend to go with I don't know. You watch. See if it's metaphor or if it's literal. We have an Irish step dance. See if it looks like they're trying to, there's just something moving them and they're not allowed to move, but boy, they just can't keep their feet still.
Just watch, you probably
Watch.
won't be able to hear the music, but we'll share the screen for this.
People are clogging,
Find the right-
hillbilly clogging. Same thing, people. Everybody. You know, where's my feet? I'm in trouble.
All right. So Jane, did that look like somebody that was trying to dance atop a barrel or somebody that just had the wiggles in them that had to come out somehow?
The wiggles, definitely the wiggles.
Yeah. Trying to keep it all in, but it just kind of sneaks at your feet. I don't know. Makes more sense to me, but who's to argue with history, right? I don't know. I don't know. So, what's it mean? Big deal. Not supposed to dance, been told not to dance. What does it hurt? Right? Just don't dance. Well, we'll talk about body data, body wisdom, body knowledge in this little quote. Body data, okay, is information about how we feel. For instance, we might feel cold. Body knowledge is a pattern that we discern in the collected data. We might feel cold in the morning. Body wisdom refers to the choices we make that are rooted in the patterns of our experience. This wisdom emerges from listening to and trusting our own information about the body and aligning with that for common good. Body wisdom tells us we need to grab a jacket in the morning. Too often, she says, our spiritual lives are cut off from that embodied wisdom, leaving us fragmented. So you see one thing or you're feeling one thing and you think you can do this, but you have these rules that keep you from doing what you feel like you should do when you feel that. If you feel happy, you want to do this, but they say you can't do that if you're at church, you know, or, you know, so I don't know if you feel this kind of fragmentation or not. The religious experience can remain in our head. And we're comfortable there. Keep it all in that internal space. The thought of movement or dance, maybe that frightens us a little bit more. Wonder how people who are terrified of physical movement, but somehow we still know we need it. It's still in there. They're going to come out our feet or going to come out somewhere. I don't know. And, oh, so what about Mike? You said that at some point in your life you were a wallflower, Mike.
Well, when I was a
Sometimes
freshman and
you
sophomore in high school, well, when I was in elementary school, I just went along. At home, if I got upset about something, I'd take off, go off and sit and stump in the woods. Mom wouldn't know where I was. I just kind of hung loose and not got involved. And when I was a freshman sophomore, my high school had 115 kids in my class. And so there's 500, 600 in the school. And so if you went to a school dance, if you didn't move, nobody would even talk to you. So you did a little bit, but you weren't out there asking any girls to dance. You just kind of moving on the side, whatever. Junior year, I went to a school and had 43 in my class. And there was 200 in the high school. First dance I go to, I'm used to at least doing a little movement out there. And so I go out on the floor, ask this girl to dance. And, I'm 15 years old, 16 years old, and got the guts to do that. Come to find out I was the only boy out there. Okay. Dance was over. I walk off the side of the room and I got about five or six guys ready to clean my clock. Because I was dancing with the girls.
Prohibition.
But before the year was over, they were dancing with the girls because I wasn't going back down. The girls weren't they had some guy going to dance with them. And I wasn't dancing with one girl. So kind of opened the door for you. Say, wait a minute, this isn't too bad.
So something was missing. The other guys said something was missing. So we'll look quickly at some consequences of being fragmented, of having ideas, and feelings and emotions, even related to worship or spirituality that are prohibited. Psalm 137. This is kind of a familiar psalm. Alongside Babylon's streams, there we sat down, crying because we remembered Zion. We hung our harps up in the trees there because that's where our captors asked us to sing. Our tormentors requested songs of joy. Sing us a song about Zion, they said. How could we possibly sing the Lord's song on foreign soil? So it progresses. So they're grieving, right? And maybe Babylon was making fun of them, sarcastic, play us a happy song. But it's more commonly believed that the Babylonians were trying to integrate them. Don't be sitting around sulking. Come on, sing. You're here, make the most of it. They wanted them to be productive citizens, not sit around moping. That was more the spirit of Babylon. Everybody come on, so we slaughtered your city. Big deal. Let's just dance together now. Sing us a song. Sing us that good Zion music. So then they see that as being insulting. It's not encouraging. They think it's criticism. It ends up in verse 9, a blessing on the one who seizes your children and smashes them against the rocks. So it went from being grieving and depressed to being paranoid, to thinking that they're making fun of you, to wanting retribution on them of something as violent as smashing your babies on the rocks. So it went from a progression. Emergence from root of sorrow turned into bitterness and then hostility because they weren't singing, because all they were doing was sitting. They were fragmented. They hung their harps. They forgot all about that. So I don't know if that proves anything or not, but I've always seen that progression as being something that, a dangerous progression of just giving up joy, of letting it be taken from you and refusing to integrate those painful experiences. And you become that fragmented person. Okay. So this guy says in his little booklet, there is no dance without God, and no dance in which God is not a partner. It's up to you to refuse to be a spectator and participate with joy. Just like the Israelites sitting in Babylon, it's up to them. But what happens when they sit there? To choose to live another way slowly erodes the spirit of our lives until we pull away what God created, the opportunities that are yet ours. When you get a chance to dance, sit it out or dance, I hope you dance. It's not just me. Next week we'll hear God saying, dance with me. I don't know if that all fits together or not. One thought leads to the next or not, but there's reasons why we have the inhibitions that we have. And when it comes to moving with the Spirit, that's the significant part. The Spirit of God, we talked about last week, is moving, always moving. And going with the Spirit means we're going to dance with the wind. Is that literal or physical? Metaphor or literal? Spirit is moving you. I think it's more than metaphor. I think it's more than literal, honestly.
Kind of both.
I guess the question is, can you dance without physical movement?
What has to move is your spirit moving.
But then is that metaphoric or literal?
Yeah, I think probably if your spirit is moving, I think it's more than literal.
But I don't know that your spirit is moving necessarily. It's just internal. So from that
But
observation,
you should see it, it's busting move.
I have no doubt.
I can attest.
I have no doubt. I've seen it, regardless of whether it's been physical or not, but people may not see that you're literally having a dance because you're all, it's kind of like sitting in our worship service when we're playing the last
Yeah. I agree.
And-
I'm trying not.
and most of us
fun.
are sit there
Especially when you're up
just
front.
focusing on the sound and and it is moving you, but you're not physically,
I am.
well, some of us aren't.
Yeah,
Try my
Yeah, the vacuum carries.
it's fun to watch, to walk down the aisle and see people trying to sit still during the postlude.
and a lot of times it's just, for me, it really is that uplifting that I don't, my desire to do a physical movement is overridden by my desire to take it in and to just grab it.
Very neat.
And so the other side of that is, how many church services have we been in where there's, right? We do it almost every Sunday, right? So.
I've been known to twirl a stole going down the aisle.
I've seen that. I don't know
It's
why.
been a while, but trying to refrain.
Yes, this little
Now,
bitsy pieces.
Yeah, maybe you ought to be doing a coming down the aisle, huh?
You would be.
So, yeah, the question is, are we still free enough to move with the moving of the Spirit of God?
Should the anchor for the brick house.
That's the question.
Just to relate to the Wallflower situation, working at Emmaus, recreation person, I gotta be up talking all this stuff. And we have people in wheelchairs. And ask staff to dance with the person that they brought. And they said, no, I won't be a Wallflower. And that was one of the hardest things for me to deal with personally, because I knew the person sitting in the wheelchair wanted nothing more than to be out on that dance floor. And when you take that person out and dance with them and you watch them doing this in their wheelchair, everything else is okay. And it's that Spirit of God moves you right there. Couldn't explain that to this young lady, but she didn't get it.
Next week is about inclusion and invitation to, yeah, dance with the Spirit. Literal? Metaphor. Jane will have to decide. That's all I got.
Whatever I don't think it is, right?
That's right. Whichever one's the most challenging.
Challenging is sitting still when they're playing the final music at church. Even on the computer, I'm
Everybody's gonna be watching everybody in church. And the dance police.
No, we're gonna have the not dance police. Not dancing something not right.
All right, thanks for everybody's attention tonight, and hope that you enjoyed it and gives you something to think about. Stay warm and dry.
Yeah.
See you later.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.